From the enigma that is Ryoko Kui, the mangaka behind Terrarium and Drawer and Dungeon Meshi, comes 7 Little Sons of the Dragon, a beautiful anthology of impressive imagination, spanning multiple time periods and fantastical settings. A must-read for any fan of the talented author's style. And if there was one word we could use to boil down this style, then it would so obviously be the term clever. Everything this woman does, in terms of manga, is just so damn clever. From the short stories she writes, to the spins she puts on the fantasy genre, and even things like panel placement and their designs are undoubtedly clever. It's a praise that sounds kinda light at first, but is actually one of the highest things writers or artists of any kind can hope to achieve. To leave such an impression on someone that they stop and ask themselves, hey, why didn't I think of that? It's fantastic. More fantastic yet, the 7 stories found within this manga just oozes with her character, creativity, and charisma. If the main series she's known for has left a sort of dungeon-sized hole in your heart, then 7 Sons hopes to alleviate that pain with humor, emotion, and the same gifted storytelling we're used to when it comes to Kui. 2 or 3 of these are even good enough to be their own stories, for crying out loud. They're that charming, that good. Honestly, probably all of them could be, and a complete delight to read. Ladies and gentlemen, without further introduction, these are the 7 Little Sons of the Dragon. So the first story, The Dragon's Turret, opens in a faraway fantasy land where 2 kingdoms, rightfully named after their surroundings, are at war with each other over a matter of territory. The perfect little vignette for anyone coming off of a Dungeon Meshi read. Or watch for that matter. You see, these 2 kingdoms, the Sea Kingdom and the Mountain Kingdom, would like nothing more than to do battle out on the field that runs between their 2 territories. Problem is, the border that separates these 2 countries, via stone wall, has been unapologetically stolen by a mother dragon and her nest. Technically, it's not a dragon per se, it's actually a griffin. Like if you see here, that's totally a griffin. But in the story, the people refer to it as a dragon. And in a roundabout, symbolic kind of way, I guess it is. But just for the sake of this video, I'm going to be calling it a griffin. It'll make things less confusing when the actual dragons show up in the other stories. Anyway, so this mama griffin is in the process of laying her eggs, which according to the story's lore, takes a while. Takes a couple months actually. And what this means for the war is that so long as that beast resides on that tower wall, the 2 armies can't really fight each other, as the griffin attacks any and all who dare cross the border. Now, aside from the denial of bloodshed, the beast guarding the border deprives both kingdoms of their trade as well. Like I said, the griffin will attack anyone on a horse, regardless of their intentions. So not only is the fighting stunted, but just the economy and trading as a whole for both of the countries is just at a standstill. With all this in mind, the story kicks off with us meeting Yurika, daughter of the commandant, serving at a tavern in the Mountain Kingdom. One day, upon delivering some food to her father, Yurika discovers a member of the Sea Kingdom being held prisoner within their walls. Strange, seeing as the previously mentioned griffin attacks anyone who gets too close to its nest. Makes you wonder on how this guy got through. After a while though, and some rough interrogations, a deal is struck between the stranger and the commandant. In exchange for their kingdom's potatoes, the man from the Sea Kingdom will bring them salt, seeing as they have an abundance of it. They're right by the ocean. A deal which takes Yurika by surprise, as she doesn't trust this stranger one bit. But the man needs the food. His people are sick and need to eat in order to heal their bodies. And so, he sets off. As time passes, we see glimpses of the lives lived by those found within the Mountain Kingdom. And let me just say, times are pretty tough. As with any kingdom at war, many of the country's resources have been depleted, mainly in the form of food, spices, and minerals, making things like suspicion, tension, and even infighting a higher occurrence than usual. And just as things look to be going off badly, the strange man from the Sea Kingdom returns with what was promised. It's funny, Yurika doesn't even recognize him at first and throws a brick at him. It's hilarious. But thanks to the previous exchange between him and her father, the man was able to save his comrades in desperate need of food. And just like he promised, he brought the salt. all of which fits into a single wheelbarrow, revealing just how he's been getting across the border without being torn to pieces. Apparently, if a singular person were to walk through the gate without the use or noise of a horse, then apparently the griffin would pay them no mind, something each country's army has failed to figure out. And with this, a small pact is formed between the stranger and the commandant. As long as the salt stayed a-flowin', the potatoes seaside could keep a-goin'. A fair trade agreement, if you ask me. They had the food, and they had the salt, so the exchange just seemed natural. And an agreement that would only last until the dragon leaves its nest. During this time spent walking between the kingdoms and bringing them salt in exchange for food, Yurika and the stranger would begin to form a cute little bond together, one symbolized by a shell necklace he gifts her on one of his visits. Now this type of necklace holds significance to the Sea Kingdom, as people will place their wishes inside of these before wearing the shells around their necks. So people just wouldn't give these away. They're special. They hold some kind of significance. Now, more time would pass until eventually the baby griffins were getting ready to leave the nest, meaning the mother too would be leaving soon, allowing the two kingdoms to fight and kill each other in peace, with this last visit from the Salt Man being his last. Yurika even offers back the necklace, but the man refuses, no longer wanting the wish he made on that shell. He no longer wishes for his kingdom to win this war, and with that, he leaves. In fact, everyone leaves, both armies departing from their respective homes to finally do battle on that field at the beginning of the story. Here, they wait, all eyes patiently trained for the baby griffin to make its first leap out of the nest, the green light, if you will, for this deadly race to commence. But as everyone waits on bated breath, we see the griffin momentarily taking flight before crashing down to the ground, rather comedically too. I love the expressions Kui draws here. Annoyed by all this, the general of the Mountain Kingdom reaches for a bow and arrow in order to finish off the baby griffin. He just really wants to do battle. He's tired of waiting. And then, as all hope feels lost, Yurika comes from behind and knocks the general unconscious, just comes out of nowhere. However, the arrow still managed to be released, except from this angle, it only hits near the baby and not directly on it. This arrow even spooks the baby griffin, and it immediately starts to take flight as everyone watches and stares, gripping onto each other. And as the little guy scratches and claws against the stone wall, its wings finally pierce the blue veil of the sky, and it's off. At this point, everyone from both sides just begins celebrating, going so far as to throw down their weapons, their helmets, everything, cheering even. Too happy from what just transpired to do battle. And so, the first story ends with our two protagonists holding hands and Yurika's wish coming true. That wish to be able to look out at the sea together with her newfound love. Damn. First story, and we're already getting off to a good start. I don't know what it is about this last scene that I love so much. Maybe it's because we get to experience even more fantasy settings by this author. Maybe it's because it makes me think about me and my wife, or maybe it's because it's drawn so beautifully. Regardless, something about this last page is just so awesome in terms of a visual conclusion. It's lovely, breathtaking even, and the perfect start to a manga anthology. I'm a total sucker for stories centered around hope. In fact, if you pay attention closely, you'll notice a running theme throughout the manga based on hope in all of its different forms. Or at least, that's how I interpreted some of these. Just keep that in the back of your mind while we continue. Now, this next story takes place in a more modern setting. Our modern setting, albeit one in which mermaids are not only real, but a sort of ecological/political topic amongst the people living there. The Mermaid Refuge opens with Jun, a high school boy living in this coastal town, finding a mermaid unconscious on the side of the road one day, presumably from heat exhaustion, and only a couple yards away from the beach. Aside from dousing her with water, there's nothing really the boy can do aside from calling an ambulance. And with that encounter behind him, he heads up to school. Here at the high school, we're also introduced to Hama, Jun's friend, and someone currently experiencing physical abuse from their father. You see, much like children from any small town in any part of the world, Hama wants to break out of here, to leave this place, and to never look back, to have opportunities impossible to him if he were to remain in this small coastal town. And this is something the boy's father just doesn't put up with. It's really sad, but an uncomfortable truth many people have to deal with. Overall though, Hama doesn't think about it too much, brushing it off even. Nor does he feel any sympathy for the mermaids in the same way Jun does. Because when the boy tells him about what he found on the way to school this morning, Hama just claims them to be only animals that mimic humans, nothing more. He's not really too fond of them. Now as the school day ends and Jun pedals his way back home, he encounters the same mermaid in the same spot, again trying to cross the road for some mysterious reason, almost getting hit by this truck in the process to stop her. He even puts her back into the water, but she just continues to pop back up and attempts to drag herself across the street. Now since Jun is unable to communicate with the mermaid verbally, the next couple of pages are spent charading to each other as the two slowly begin to understand what it is the mermaid wants. For some strange reason, maybe it's because she sees humans resembling her own age or something, but for some reason, the mermaid would like nothing more than to climb the top of this hill and to visit the school, the same school Jun and Hama attend. Later that night, as Jun is doing research on mermaids online, he thinks back to the incident that happened to Hama's father many years ago, where he accidentally killed a mermaid. It's not exactly said how, but this had people vandalizing his car and property, and it also explains why his son disdains them so much. The next day though, Jun takes it upon himself to take his parents' wheelbarrow and sets out to the beach. His plan being to fill it up with water and to carry the mermaid up the entire hill, using an umbrella to block the sun in order to prevent her from drying out. A scene eerily resembling that of a lone wolf and cub panel. Again, Ryoko Kui cracks me up with these little details she adds. I love it. Anyway, so the journey up the hill is long, but eventually, the two of them make it to the school, all in one piece. Despite it being the weekend, students can still be seen everywhere as they have club activities like sports and stuff like that. And as the two make their way over to the baseball field, we see Hama practicing, but he's not really happy to see them together. Here, the boys argue over whether or not the mermaids are human enough to understand or even converse with, Hama being extra vile with his talk of the creatures. And as the two high schoolers argue, the mermaid tips herself out of the wheelbarrow and drags herself over to them, revealing a baseball from the pocket of her shirt. Apparently, this mermaid knows who Hama is, or at least has watched him practice baseball before. This ball was one that had been knocked into the ocean however long ago, and she just wanted to return it to him, personally. But Hama disregards this, he doesn't believe they have complex thoughts and stuff like that. So the two just leave, heading back down the hill. Upset by all this, Jun and the mermaid return to the pier where the other mermaids always sunbathe, and something rather strange happens. Just out of the blue, as the boy is staring out to sea, the mermaid suddenly pushes him into the water before taking a bucket full of air and placing it on top of his head. The mermaid then begins dragging Jun down into the water's dark depths, deeper and deeper. Naturally, this spooks the boy and he just pushes himself free, swimming away back to the surface, an act which appears to have hurt the mermaid in some emotional way. And once back on land, the boy thinks about what just transpired. What was the mermaid trying to do? Was she trying to show me around her school, the ocean floor, or maybe she was even trying to take me to the palace of the Dragon King? Either way, Jun realizes that the mermaid was just trying to return the favor for his generosity, to do the same thing he did for her. And with this, the boy leaves the beach feeling some kind of shame. Luckily though, the story doesn't end here on a depressing note. It would really suck if this was the last page, but luckily it's not. The next day, Hama and Jun bump into each other outside of the homeroom teacher's office, the tension from the previous day still lingering over them. Unlike the previous day though, Hama's mood is way less sour. Quite the opposite actually, as he just found out that he's being accepted for a job at a local workshop. And to make things better, it's an apprenticeship, which means he'll be living there at the shop, one step closer to his independence away from this town. As for Jun, when Hama asks him what he's here for, we learn that the boy recently changed the school he was wanting to go into after graduation, now wanting to pursue marine research in the hopes of one day being able to understand and communicate with the mermaids more clearly. The story then ends with the two friends parting ways, as Hama wishes him the best of luck. And the mermaid, now sunbathing in her usual spot, is waiting, with an empty bucket sitting right beside her. Again, I'm gonna have to gush over this last scene's paneling just for a little bit. Now, yeah, the story was heartwarming and cutesy and stuff like that, but I gotta nerd out over this paneling for a second. I love these close-ups overlaid the larger background here. It's like the page at the end of the Dragon's Turret story. I just think it's really cool in terms of design choice. Something else I wanted to add real quick, if you didn't notice with the character names, but they're kind of like puns. The name Hama here can also refer to the beach or a seashore, while the name Jun, when written with this kanji, means moisture, the thing he was trying to keep the mermaid. Do with this information what you will. Moving on. Story number 3, titled My God, or in this scan, it's titled My Very Own God, while on the shorter side, was still heartfelt and humorous nonetheless. So, the story follows this middle school girl, Yuki Fukuhara, as she worries over the results of her private school entrance exams, something she'll be stressing over for the entirety of this 20-page story. We open with Yuki's walk after school to a local construction site, a place she likes to go to when she needs to study, and it doesn't take long for things to take a rather bizarre turn, as while she's studying up on aquatic life, the girl comes face to face with the god of this local area, which is just a giant fish standing sideways on its fins. He's also very polite in the way he speaks. The two quickly strike up a friendship as Yuki shows the god what has happened to his river, completely filled in by the construction. It's no matter though, because Yuki here decides to take the god home with her and to take care of it, to be her fish. It's here at the girl's home where we meet her overbearing mother, and what I assume to be the true source of all her stress. Yes, the literal thing she's stressing over are the entrance exams, but the way in which the mom talks to her, dumping all these goals and ambitions on her, is a scene that hits home for any of us. I think we can all relate to an overbearing parent who only wants the best for their kids, but does so in a forceful way. You feel bad for her, but she is allowed to keep the giant fish, so I guess the mom isn't that bad. The container Yuki uses in place of a fishbowl is this rhino beetle cage, which is a thing I didn't even know existed. I'm just now learning of these. I didn't know people kept beetles in their house. Those Animal Crossing games make more sense now. At first the fish is so big that the sides of it spill over, but after only one day, the thing has already shrunk in size a little, managing to fit into this new fish tank perfectly now, inside of the girl's room, with Yuki even praying to the god in order to pass her upcoming exams. When she comes down for dinner later that night, we kind of get a feel for the whole family dynamic here. While the father is genuinely concerned about his daughter's mood, taking the time to talk to her about it, the mom instead lectures the daughter for not having finished every single grain of rice in her bowl, mentioning the superstition Japan has of the 7 gods residing on every grain of rice. A pretty cramped situation when thinking of one's stomach. After dinner, she brings the fish and onigiri, but alas, rice cannot sustain a fish, let alone a divine one. Luckily though, Yuki's father can see that she's devastated, so he takes her out to buy some supplies for her new heavenly pet. While out of the house, the two have a heart-to-heart conversation about Yuki's exams and what they would mean if Yuki were to fail them, her pent-up stress finally coming out in the drive back home, asking if she'll still be the same person if all things go wrong, much like the hill of the construction site she often studies at. But with his sage dad advice, the father explains to her that there's nothing to worry about, and that she should go visit that construction site once winter has come, and see what the hill looks like once they've finished. While confusing at first, we later see Yuki returning to this study spot, only this time, there is no construction. In its place are new apartment buildings, and what I assume to be the new gods of that hill, the replacement gods for the fish, giant puppies. When she gets home later that day, the dad asks her, "Did you see the hill? Did it look any different?" And this is when the advice finally clicks with Yuki, as the dad then goes on to explain that despite the area having changed in appearance, it's still the same place, just now filled with new people and new life. Much like this hill, Yuki may change with what happens, but there will still always be something residing there at the end of the day. It's not like she won't exist if things don't go her way or anything like that. He hugs his daughter, assuring her that no matter what happens, she will be okay. Don't stress about this test, everything will be fine. Oh, and one thing to add, this scan of the page that you're seeing right now has the wrong translations. In the book it says, "You'll be a splendid young lady," but for some reason right here they just put, "You'll be a great big sister." Like, the mom isn't pregnant or anything, but they just write, "You're gonna be a big sister." I just thought that was funny to add. After the pep talk from her dad, Yuki returns to her room to find the fish god now the size of a tiny anchovy. Here it thanks her for not only caring for it when it lost its home, but also for creating a whole new world inside of this fish tank for it to become the god of. It's now the god of this fishbowl, not of the mountains. The two exchange a quick handshake as the fish promises to pray for her passing. And the next day, she fails. Despite having the god's fortune on her side, she still failed the test. But now, she's not as hung up about it as she previously was. And with that, the story ends with Yuki concluding that there are no gods, nor are there any Buddhas. It's just all nonsense. It's all untrue. And again, these scans didn't have the same phrasing down as in the book, so I'll just fill it in right here. I feel like the book had the funnier line, so that's why I'm adding it. Luckily, I just so happen to own a copy. But I get the online translators are just trying to do their best here. And honestly, it's hard translating Japanese into English, so I'm not shitting on them or anything, I just wanted to point out some of the nuances. Our next story, Wolves Don't Lie, is cleverly split into two separate yet connected short stories. The first one being a manga created by the mother of a baby werewolf, and the second being the life of that werewolf, now grown up and dealing with getting older. I don't think I've ever seen a short story do this, like ever. It's kind of like manga-ception almost. So the manga within a manga portion is fairly straightforward. Written by Yukari Umatani in this cutesy, cartoonish style, My Rough Little Pup is an autobiographical account of the mother's experience with her 3-year-old son Kita, as well as WWS, or werewolf syndrome, as a whole. I know, it sounds goofy, but just keep with it. It goes somewhere. Through this story within a story, we learn key details on topics that will come up later in the second story. For example, we learn that the werewolf syndrome is a hereditarily passed disease, meaning that the grandma and the mom has it. And we also learn about the type of medicine the child will need in the future in order to prevent the use of cages or choker collars, as during certain periods, the boy will experience charged up states of extra energy, which he needs to burn out by running or other physical activity. You know, like a dog of some kind, a wolf of sorts. During the story, Yukari also talks about her experience going to a support group for mothers with werewolf children, which only perpetuates her fears and anxieties on the topic. In the end though, after discussing with multiple sources, Yukari and her husband move Kita out of the city and into the countryside, better suiting their son's needs, although now it's doubled the husband's commute time to work. Rest in peace, Papa Umatani. The second half of the story then opens up in a completely different art style over 15 years later, with Kita, now a college student, waking up from one of his usual 2-day naps. Now right off the bat, we get to see some of the things Mama Yukari had mentioned previously in her manga. We see the countryside house the family moved to, the extra hair Kita sheds, the appetite swings, and other WWS related symptoms. We even get to see Yukari and her husband again, now older after all these years. But most importantly, the first couple of pages of this story shows us all of the struggles Kita goes through when dealing with this secret illness. The young werewolf loses his job due to train times taking 3 hours to reach the city, oversleeping causes him to miss college classes, and he fails to hold down any kind of meaningful relationship in his life due to the moon's positioning and his werewolf cycles. During these cycles, Kita's body and mind goes through these extreme changes, culminating with his personality shifting from his usual awkward and introverted self to a more outgoing, dances with underwear on head kind of person. Like he literally did that. The life of the party, you might say. And the complete opposite of what he's actually like. He says the process feels like you're getting drunk almost, unable to fully remember what you did the previous day, akin to blacking out. Well, during one of these blackouts, apparently he got a little too close and personal with a girl he goes to school with, Saya Kurashima. Despite not knowing what went down specifically, it must have been a good time because she invites our boy here out for a cup of tea later that day. During this little tea outing, we learn more about their encounter as the classmate asks Kita if he was drunk the last time they saw each other. Apparently, during their last meeting, he kept going on and on about his mother, but of course, he doesn't remember any of it, so he just assumes their conversation was about the complaints he's having with his mom, though Saya doesn't know the complaints or of his using of the WWS medicine, the same medicine that was spoken about in Yukari's Rough Little Pup manga, and the very medicine he needs in order to prevent his energy from building up the way it does during a cycle. The mom won't let him use it due to the side effects. But Saya doesn't know about all that. Kita thought he was just probably venting to her about stuff without blowing his secret. The classmate then encourages him to talk to her directly about all the feelings he shared with her, and with that, she's off. Kita returning home too via long-ass train ride. Once home, he takes up his classmate on her advice, and he just sort of unloads all of that teenage angst onto Yukari. He actually goes a little too hard on her, something he thinks he's in the right for because of Saya's advice. Now Kita even takes things a step further by going to the hospital behind his parents' back in order to get the medicine he wants. We also catch a glimpse of some scars the mom has as the scene changes. 3 days would pass after getting these meds, and Kita would again meet up with Saya, this time for a proper date at the aquarium. It's really cute. Everything here goes pretty smoothly actually, with the two of them even grabbing a bite to eat after. Well, everything starts fine until Saya finds out about what Kita has done. Apparently, rather than assuming he was just venting about his mom, he was actually confiding in Saya about her, about how much he appreciates her. He wasn't mad at Yukari at all. In fact, he was extremely grateful for all the things she's done for him over the years. So him screaming at her earlier was never supposed to happen. You foolish, foolish teenager. And since Kita can't even remember the last conversation they had together, Saya asks him if he even remembers what the two of them did that night, of the flirting and all the things Kita asked her to do for him. All of this transpiring in an extremely comedic fashion as Kita gets woozy and passes out. Shit, I would too, honestly. While passed out, in his dreams, or memories rather, we see what actually transpired on that fateful day of his blackout. Here we see him fully in his wolf form, roaming the countryside while his mom tries her hardest to catch and bring him home, afraid of the danger that may befall him. Although he's fast, Mama Yukari is faster because she eventually does catch him, which explains the scars we saw on her arms just a couple scenes ago. When Kita wakes up again, he's in the hospital surrounded by his mom and Saya. Here, Kita finally thanks his mom for all that she's done for him, apologizing for the things he's said, and coming to terms with the werewolf personality just being part of who he is. He's just gonna have to deal with it. It's not like it's a completely separate entity, it's still him under there. He just accepts it now. Once outside, the two explain to a very confused Saya that Kita here is a werewolf, and has been this whole time. At first she's shocked, but then eventually realizes that him being a werewolf explains those things Kita made her do, as previously mentioned. And we learned what was implied to be a sexual encounter between the two, or at least that's what I thought it was, actually turned out to be Kita making Saya treat him like a dog. Literally, in the form of pets and commands like shaking and rolling. All of which is transpiring in the school cafeteria, so I'm assuming a lot more people saw this incident go down than just Saya. Like he's fucked for life, like that's so embarrassing. And as the three begin leaving, the story ends with Yukari telling her son that he's finally found a good trainer for himself, ending off rather cutely. What can I say about this one? Just like the previous three, it's clever and charming as hell. Though now, I really want a spin-off, slice-of-life manga that follows Saya and Kita living together post-werewolf discovery. Same goes with the first one. More of that world would have been so cool to see. Story number 5, aptly named after the main protagonist, Byakuroku the Penniless, follows the journey of an aging artist inside of a setting very much resembling feudal Japan. Though neither the painter nor the setting are actually real. She tricked me with this one, guys. I thought it was a fictitious spin on a real-life person, but this is all just made up. So hats off, Ryoko Kui, you've tricked me. Again. Anyway, our story begins with the introduction of Byakuroku Takagawa, a painter of such legend and renown that it's said he purposefully leaves an eye unfinished in all of his paintings. If he were ever to do so, the images would spring out of the scrolls and come alive. Literally, alive. In the very first scene, we can see the mythic painter completing the eyeball on a counterfeit painting of his. A fake. a phony recreation of this nobleman riding a horse. Basically, he's drawing in the eyeball in order to interrogate him for answers. The artist wants to know just who exactly has painted something claiming to be Byakuroku the Penniless. But the painting is unaware. In fact, he's unaware of most things in life, but keeps the comedic relief going nonetheless. As the name implies, Byakuroku here is completely broke after being swindled out of all of his fortune, selling the remaining supplies he had until but a single brush and a tiny block of ink remained. Now, with the help of the forgery painting, the artist wishes to travel to previous paintings he's done of rare and mythical creatures in order to bring them to life, capture them, and then somehow sell them, in the hopes of making up the money that was stolen from him. I love this premise. This is probably the coolest one out of all of them. And so, the two of them, or rather, the three of them in this case, set out on their journey to animate these paintings. The first of which is a tiger painting located in a nearby mansion. At first, upon arrival, it seems that the two will be having a harder time trying to get in here than they previously thought. But luckily, the nobleman has the eye of the legendary Byakuroku Takagawa, and swoons the house servant immediately. His good-looking eye irresistible to the human woman. And so, the two make their way into the mansion and over to the tiger painting. Rather foolishly in my opinion, the nobleman has but a single rope to prepare with, to catch this enormous beast with, and I think we can all see how this is gonna end. Byakuroku completes the tiger's eye, and the thing just bolts right out of there, punching an enormous hole in the wall as it goes out. I don't know what they were expecting to happen. After all, the nobleman is only made of paper. What is he gonna do to a real-life tiger? Regardless, the two leave empty-handed, with the artist now setting his sights on a painting of lions he sold to a merchant many years ago. And since they left at the end of the day, the two have no option but to take shelter for the night in a small hut they find. It's funny, despite Byakuroku being such a mythical painter, he can't bring inanimate objects like food to life, something the nobleman tries to have him do, but they just end up eating mushrooms, and not the fun kind. It's during this night that the artist and the painting have a heart-to-heart discussion about his life. They talk about the disciple who swindled him out of his money, about his doctor's son whom he hasn't spoken to or even seen for 20 years, and about his wife running away with the rest of his money, leaving him penniless. It's sad. He's a man who not only is all alone, but wants to be, of his own volition. You feel for the guy, because it must be a very lonely way to exist. But this doesn't stop him, as the next day, the two of them make their way to the merchant's house. Here, they are treated rather poorly upon arrival, and it's also here where I wanted to go on a little side tangent for the next scene to make sense to you. So, o-chazuke, or just simply chazuke, is a simple dish of cooked rice that gets doused with hot water, dashi, or even tea. It's a leftovers sort of dish, allowing one to throw mushrooms, seaweed, or pretty much anything else you have lying around in it. It's more of a snack than an actual meal. Like you could probably finish 2 or 3 of these to yourself. Not exactly something you serve to people visiting you as a guest. Like you would make this for your kid or something in a hurry. This isn't something you make for the legendary Byakuroku. Except, in this case, the dish is called bubuzuke, which is what they call chazuke over in Kyoto. So that's why I thought this guy was real at first, because the dish is a real dish, and bubuzuke is a real nomenclature, but no, it's just a fictitious pseudo-Edo place, I guess. But I digress. The artist doesn't really seem to mind the disrespect the dish proposes though, as he already knows that humans behave awfully to one another, something the painting is naive to. Kind of a downer, but ultimately true. With their meal now residing in their stomachs, the two make their way over to the lion painting. Multiple lions, in fact. I think shishi is what the original Chinese name for these lions are before they came over to Japan. And just like before, Byakuroku completes their last eyes and brings them all to life. Despite being bashed and bruised, this time, the nobleman actually manages to catch a lion, albeit a lion cub, which won't really earn the artist enough money, leaving him but a single option left. With his ink supply running low and his time getting short, the painter resorts to one last painting, the dragon painting located at the mountain temple. Now, unlike the previous creatures, the dragon will absolutely not be caught. What they'll have to resort on is getting a scale ripped from its body, the scale being worth a fortune in of itself. Before they do this though, the painting again tries to have a heartfelt conversation with him, this time asking the artist to make him human. But Byakuroku is having none of it, settling on fixing his kimono design as a proper form of reward. And with a newfound fervor, the two set out to the mountain temple. Despite getting salt thrown at them for being beggars, the monks actually allow the painter and the painting passage into the temple after a little hassle. The nobleman even trying to pull out his sword and trying to act all intimidating, but since he's a forgery, it just comes out like a wet noodle. Regardless, the artist reminds the nobleman that they aren't here to fight. They're here for the scale. And if he manages to get this scale, Byakuroku complies with the demands and agrees to redraw him properly, bringing the nobleman to life and finally turning him human. Now, unlike the two previous paintings, the dragon one is just enormous, impossibly enormous, stretching all the way down a hallway. It's intimidating. And as the painter completes the painting, clouds begin to form in the sky above, as the dragon breathes in new life. Our nobleman here, without further thought, quickly grabs onto the enormous beast as it not only takes flight, but summons a huge lightning storm in the process. But wouldn't you know it, for the first time, the painting actually pulls through and manages to snag himself a single dragon scale. Sadly, in the process of the dragon summoning this storm, Byakuroku gets hit by the lightning, and rather badly too, as a fire begins raging inside of the temple. Now this next part is probably one of the most heartwarming scenes in the anthology, as the painting takes it upon himself to save the artist on foot, despite there being a rainstorm going on outside. As he's doing so, the nobleman's body dissolves bit by bit by bit. I mean, he's paper after all. But as the painting searches for a doctor, he's turned down every single time, until the paintings from their previous escapades find him out there in the storm, even offering him a ride on the tiger's back. With their help, he instructs the beast to take him to the one place he knows he can find a doctor, Byakuroku's son. And perhaps faster than the dragon's lightning, the tiger takes off at a breakneck speed, managing to reach the sun just in time to save the artist, and also just before the painting disintegrates completely, looking straight out of a pun-pun panel or something like that. You gotta commend him though, he really gave it his all, pushing himself to the absolute breaking point, while also securing the dragon scale in the doctor's hands. Something he thought would be used as a payment for the treatment, but actually, the scale is the treatment. It can be used as a powder to recover injured patients from any disease. With the medicine having done its thing, the son wants to thank this stranger, but is met with nobody, save the rainy night. The next morning, with the lions and tiger now sleeping around him, Byakuroku wakes up to a rather peculiar sight, one he didn't intend to see. It's a painting of the nobleman. Except in this case, it's his painting, the real version of the counterfeit he's been going on adventures with. When the son gets into the room, he is delighted at the sight of his father in good health, explaining to him that an unknown stranger brought him here in the middle of the night. But Byakuroku is still stunned by what he sees. When the artist sees this painting, he tries explaining to his son that it was this man who brought him here, this man who saved him, or at least a counterfeit version of him. And it's here where I started bawling my eyes out, because it's revealed that this counterfeit copy of the painting was actually done by the son. Secretly, he would practice painting to emulate his father, to be just like his dad. It was his son's painting that brought the two back together. The story ends with Byakuroku shedding a single tear, thanking his son for the drawing that he painted all those years ago. My god, this one hits you deep. I know I said the previous story should have been its own manga, but god damn, why wasn't this like a 3-volume series or something like that? I'm baffled. Baffled. Think about all the crazy shenanigans these two could have gotten into on their quest to earn Byakuroku some money. Again, applause to Ryoko Kui on this one. God damn, I need to go get some tissues. Now our next story, My Child is Precious, Cries the Dragon, also takes place in a fictitious Edo setting. It may very well be the same setting for all we know. I personally like to think that they do. Anyway, so the story opens within the dream of a mother by the name of Yo, one of the two main characters. In this brief dream, we learn about her previous life as a farmer, and we also get to see her son. It's a precious memory to the woman, but one that's fast fleeting, as Yo is quickly awakened by a gathering taking place outside. Prince Shun, son of the reigning king, has come to this town in search of brave men to accompany him and his soldiers up to the dragon's nest, up in the mountains. For claiming a scale from the beast would cure his father's illness, which, based on the previous story, we know to be true. Of all the people there gathered in the crowd, it's Yo alone who volunteers to help guide the prince's party to the dragon's nest. And so, they all set out on their journey. While climbing the mountain, Yo and the prince talk about what the villagers were commenting on earlier, and we learn that the family she once had, the family from her dream, died in an accident long ago. An event that clearly still messes with her mind. Something interesting to note, though, is that the soldiers almost immediately notice that, despite them all being physically active, Yo seems to have more stamina than all of them combined, even more than the prince. But they just brush this off for the time being, as the sounds of the mother dragon can already be heard echoing throughout the mountains. As this trek continues, the prince eventually scratches his leg on some kind of a poisonous plant, so Yo immediately treats it with some ointment before it starts swelling up too much. But as we can see here in this panel, those same thorns cut the soldier's face, yet he isn't experiencing any swelling on his wound. Strange. And as the party stops to rest for the night, we again hear the dragon roaring and flying through the air, as this is the time she will be laying her eggs. So she's going to be extremely active, not just during the daytime. Luckily for the soldiers, Yo makes a soup to replenish their strength before eventually going to sleep. When they wake up in the morning, however, some of the soldiers have bad fevers. Again, strange. Due to this turn of events, the prince sends half of his troops to bring the sick back down the mountain, claiming he can't waste a single minute on this quest to save his father. And so, they continue. But it's here that the intentions of Yo become more apparent as she leads them deep into a bamboo forest. This is where we actually get to see her taking out one of the soldiers with her bare hands, with ease and cunning, quickly returning to the group once the deed is done. At this point, the soldiers are extremely suspicious of the woman, and even beg the prince to stop this journey at once. But he doesn't listen and presses forward regardless. Now at the top of the mountain, the party actually comes face to face with the dragon as it whooshes past them, gliding effortlessly through the air, and managing to knock off some of the soldiers in the process. The prince, Yo, and two of the remaining soldiers take shelter in a cave inside of the cliff, with the last two guards being 100% suspicious that this woman has led them into some sort of trap. I mean, it so obviously is. This is even confirmed the following day as the soldiers catch her cleaning herself by the water, revealing the tattoo of an assassin group. With ease, Yo takes out the final two soldiers, but not before revealing to us that her son was killed by their king. This journey up the mountain is her form of revenge on him, a son for a son it would seem. When the assassin returns to the cave, however, the prince has already figured out who she is, yet cannot understand why she has taken this job. It's then explained to us that it was her son's refusal of a job from the king that led to his execution, to his untimely death, as an example to the people. But the assassin had heard of the king's untimely illness and guessed that his son would be foolish enough to seek out a dragon scale to cure him. And so she waited, waiting for the prince to show up to the village we saw in the beginning of this story. Yo here has settled on sending the head of the prince back to the king as her form of revenge. But the prince doesn't care what fate may befall him. His wound has gotten worse, and there's nothing he can do to fight this woman. So he simply leaves the cave, weapons in hand, as he finishes the hunt for the mighty dragon of the mountain. Despite not slaying it that night, the assassin allows him to continue his hunt, though it's mainly due to the threat of throwing himself off the mountain, leaving no head to be sent to the king. Annoyed at his determination, the two continue up the dragon's nest and actually make it inside. But in a fit of motherly rage, the beast thrashes at the entrance of the nest, trying to claw out any intruders, with the prince trying to use one of the eggs as a sort of shield from it. And it's at this point where the assassin's maternal instincts kick back in, as she too fights the prince to release the dragon's child. And in the scuffle, the egg slips and falls from the nest, plummeting down the mountain and breaking on the ground below. In a scene requiring no dialogue whatsoever, we see the mother dragon looking at her egg before immediately flying off into the distance. She'll fight tooth and nail for an egg that's alive, but one that's dead, I guess there's no point in putting up a fight then, is there? Enraged by what just happened, the assassin draws her dagger, befuddled by not only the prince's actions, but his philosophy on life as a whole. How could anyone use a child as a shield, she exclaims, before deciding to leave him in the nest to die. Due to the leg poisoning, he can't even walk on his own, so she's assured that he's as good as gone. Luckily for the prince, though, as she leaves, the previously sent away soldiers had returned up the mountain just in time to save him. And wouldn't you know it, wedged between the pieces of the dragon's nest was a scale left behind, allowing the king to be saved after all. As for Yo, well, we see her at the bottom of the mountain, visiting the egg that had fallen out of the nest. Although, unlike the dragon mother believed, the egg was actually not dead, just cracked. And out pops a tiny baby dragon, confusing the assassin for its mother. The story then ends with the two of them setting out in search of other dragons, allowing both the prince and Yo to get what they wanted in the end. Okay, tell me when you first read this that it didn't seem like the previous world from the painting story, like a pseudo-Japan set in the past, the perfect excuse for making mythical creatures your focal point of the story. I also like how things from the previous stories seem to be bleeding over into the next one. You have the setting from the previous story in this one, and the same thing happened after the mermaid story, with Yuki studying up on marine biology after Jun mentioned he wanted to do so. Like, bits and pieces of the stories carry over to one another. I don't know if this is intentional or not, or maybe I'm just reading a little bit too much into it. And now comes the final tale of the anthology, and my second favorite story. The Inutanis, a story about a family in which all the members have some sort of supernatural power. The Inutanis are composed of 7 people. You have Yurika, the older sister who can bend dimensions, Aunt Masako, who can command flames with her pyrokinesis. There's Uncle Kazutoshi, who turns invisible. Grandpa Gonzu, who can fly, Mama Haruko has telekinesis, and the father, Masakazu, can read people's minds. Meanwhile, Arisa, the youngest daughter, only has the ability to turn people's clothes into pajamas. That's right, despite everyone else having godlike powers, our girl here essentially has the abilities of a sort of tailor magician. Our story begins with the twins, Yurika and Arisa, returning home from school and being surprised with a party for recently attaining their powers. Though, Arisa doesn't feel like hers are anything worth bragging about. Shortly after arriving, though, everyone receives a telepathic message from the dad saying he's coming home, and when he does, we see he isn't alone. With him is a college student by the name of Daichi, and apparently he's a famous student detective. He even gets talked about on local TV. The dad saw him walking in the rain on his way home and insisted that the boys stay with them for the night until the storm passes. Problem is, no one told Grandpa about this visitor. In a house full of superpower users, they all have to play it cool, but the grandpa has been floating around outside this whole time. You can see him right there in that first panel. No one gave this man the memo. And so, a hilarious sequence of events unfolds, beginning with Daichi spotting the grandpa levitating out the window. In fact, they all see him momentarily, but Yurika quickly and rather cleverly exclaims that he's falling from the roof, like he's falling down, not levitating, before quickly shifting outside with her dimension-bending abilities. With no time to explain, the older twin pushes her grandpa into a nearby pond to make her statement from earlier look more believable. But Daichi ain't no fool. He wasn't born yesterday. He's the famous university detective after all, and thus, his investigation into this murder mystery begins, not knowing who or where the culprit could be hiding. So quickly, he dashes over to the phone, but Haruko quickly sends a pair of scissors snipping towards its cords, rendering the phone useless. But this doesn't deter the lad, as he immediately begins searching for clues around the house and conducting a head count. Everyone but the uncle is present here, and so they all rush upstairs, as the murderer could literally be hiding anywhere in the house. No one's safe. And as the group breaks down the door into the room, we see Kazutoshi sleeping, but seeing as he's still wearing his clothes and he's invisible, it looks like his head has been decapitated. The second murder victim, And so they go into further lockdown, shutting all windows, locking the doors, and gathering in the living room. Time passes as they all wait impatiently. Aunt Masako even tries to steady her nerves with a cigarette, but it's been years since she had to actually use a lighter, and she screws it up, royally, bursting into enormous flames. With 3 people, murdered, I guess, the investigation ramps up even further, going into ultra detective mode, searching high and low, and even going so far as to suspect one of the family members as being the murderer. Actually, it's a little bit more convoluted than that. Not only accuses both of the twins of being the murder suspects, but he also accuses the mom and dad of having a secret third daughter this whole time, pulling the strings behind the scenes and secretly switching places with them when convenient. Bit by bit, he explains away all the little slip-ups they made, like the sister's shoes being dry or the aunt's lighter being rigged. After all, she was a lifetime smoker. The evidence was right there on the table for us all to see. The junior detective continues his speech, but as he does so, the parents slowly get madder and madder at this kid until finally the mom just throws him across the room in a fit of rage with her telekinesis. And just like that, it's lights out for our boy here. All of this commotion in the living room actually causes the other 3 to wake up and join the rest of the family in argument. They all begin stressing out, worrying until something absolutely spectacular happens. In an incredible twist of fate, Arisa finally has an opportunity to use her powers usefully. And so, she transforms the student's clothes into pajamas. And when he wakes up, he just assumes it was all a dream. Literally, the only time her powers actually came in clutch. A complete miracle scenario, with the family even doing their best to sell the whole thing to him. Later, after he leaves, the family can finally breathe a sigh of relief and finish the food that was meant to be for last night. Everyone now praising the young twin on her display of cleverness. Her dad even reflects on how they should all follow in the footsteps of Arisa and really recognize the intelligence of when to use their powers properly. It's a cute ending. The story ends with everyone getting a slice of cake and the twins sitting down on the sofa, with Arisa exclaiming that maybe she should become a pajama designer when she grows up, and Yurika replying with a small bit of envy. Because let's be honest here, of all the powers in the Inutani household, only Arisa's can actually be used to make money. See, what did I tell you guys? Did this anthology deliver, or did it deliver? The Inutani story there at the end, in my opinion, was the best way to wrap up the collection. Like, you leave the book with a smile on your face, despite it being such a roller coaster ride. I don't know if you guys have read Terrarium and Drawer, or The Dragon School is on Top of the Mountain, but the manga we just went through has to be her best anthology to date. Hands down. It's no contest. Something that just baffles my mind is the fact that no one is talking about this thing online, save for a few people here and there. But it's not nearly enough for this popular of an artist. People don't shut up about Dungeon Meshi, and for good reason, but Seven Sons came out in 2019, so what's your excuse? They sell this thing at Barnes & Noble for crying out loud. I know your weeb ass is going to Barnes & Noble. It's the most affordable way to buy this shit in the West. Now, before I can move on to all the things I liked about this manga, we first have to address some of the online scan translations, because some of these are just egregious. Like the ending to the Byakuroku the Penniless in particular. The mood is just all off. What's meant to be a soft and somber moment, and what I believe to be the peak of the whole book, was made to look kind of goofy when comparing it to the official translation for it. In the manga, what should have been Byakuroku telling his son, "I'm glad you drew that," when referencing the counterfeit painting, was instead translated as, "I am so thankful that I paint," which just completely throws off the emotional moment he's having with his son here, whom, may I remind you, he hasn't seen in 20 years. Why would he just be like, "I'm so proud of myself"? It's just funny to me. Another one was the fish god story. It's the scene towards the end when Yuki's dad is hugging her and he says, "You'll be a great big sister." But it's supposed to be translated as, "You'll turn into a splendid young lady." Again, not shitting on the translators for giving us this stuff for free, but come on, big sister? This is the first time bringing up that subject in the whole story. The mom's not pregnant, there's no kids' toys, plus she's worried about the test scores, not being a sibling. just throws off the story a little, and I thought it should be added here. Everything else though, complaint-wise, is just minor things being slightly off here and there. Nothing groundbreaking, just small things like the story titles or some of the dialogue. But that's pretty much it. Definitely, if you have the money, just buy the physical version. It's about the cost of a regular volume and roughly 60 pages longer, so you really get your money's worth. It's a 250-page manga, I think, which is way above the average of 176 to 192 range. Also, the book has these extra scenes in here that add to 4 of the stories. They're short, but still charming. They're hidden away back here. So what did this manga do right? An easy question to answer with a million good reasons. For starters, let's talk about the artwork in this thing. How she makes each individual story have a slightly different style while still holding cohesion throughout is absolutely insane. At first I thought the art styles were the exact same, aside from the manga within a manga part. But if you pay attention, the levels of realism and cartoonishness are kind of tweaked depending on the mood of the story. The dragon's turret was serious, so the artwork reflected that seriousness. The Inutanis and the Mermaid Sanctuary had more humorous art because of the themes and the setting. And the stories in between held cool stylistic choices that I came to appreciate in Yukari's Rough Little Pup and the Byakuroku the Penniless. Now when it came to page layout and design, I really think My Child is Precious, Cries the Dragon, and again, the Byakuroku story really took full advantage of the visual medium, especially My Child is Precious. I mean, look at these. Mwah, chef's kiss. Remember people, the panels are just as important as the art itself. Don't forget that. That's what separates a novice from a pro. All in all, I would place this manga extremely high on your reading list. If not for the brilliant storytelling and amazing art, then at least do it for the sheer variety of stories we have here. This manga will have you feeling the entire spectrum of emotions by the time you're done with it, ending off on a rather pleasant note. I would compare this thing to something like a 7-course meal, ending with your favorite flavor of ice cream. You're completely full by the end, but in the best way possible. The beauty of an anthology is that we don't have to commit ourselves into a 20-plus volume series. It's just all right there. Something you come to appreciate when spending time in the manga world. Because I swear, every recommendation of something good manga-wise is always met with heaps and heaps of literature to dig through. Seven Little Suns here delivers variety, and that's what I've really come to appreciate the more I read it. Now, if there's any manga anthologies out there that you like, let me know in the comments down below. I read most of what you guys post, and some of you have some really good recommendations. I like some of these takes. But yeah, that's all I had. Until next time, guys.